Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, something that I haven't really talked much about on this channel, and that is Craftworld Eldar Vypers. So this is a unit that I wasn't quite sure about when the codex first came out because it didn't really see a lot of changes from its old iteration in the previous 8th edition codex. And to be honest with you guys, I just have never really been that big of a fan of Vypers. I think they look cool, but to be honest with you, they hadn't really been good for quite a few editions. And when 8th edition and 9th edition came out, I was a little bit skeptical about using them, but I'm pretty much in a state of mind now where I do agree that Vypers are very good and can be very competitive in low numbers. And I'm going to try to explain to you guys in this video and talk a little bit about how to make the most out of your Craftworld Eldar Vypers, because they're not just good at body blocking and being used as sacrificial pawns. They can actually be used to help you win games, help score secondary objectives and things like that. So they're very useful and versatile pieces, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make the most out of them today. All right, let's get right into it. So just a quick overview of the video. We're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of Vypers. We're going to be looking at how to use Vypers in your games with a couple of examples on diagrams for you guys, just so you can visualize it a little bit. Then we're going to talk a little bit about when you should include a Vyper or two in your list. And lastly, 2 effective Vyper builds that complement the roles very well. So let's jump right into it. So looking at the Vyper stats, its base cost is 40, which is pretty cheap. It has a great movement with really squishy defensive stats. Toughness 5, wounds 6, not very tough. However, it does come with a 3+ save, and this opens up the option for a Strands of Fate roll against weapons with AP -3 or lower, which is a vast majority of the light anti-tank weapons that you're going to be facing that are going to be effective against Vypers. So these kind of weapons will be basically negated by a good Strands of Fate roll. So you can keep your Vypers alive for a little bit longer. If they're trying to score on a secondary objective or they're trying to score on a primary objective, you can use the Strands of Fate dice to keep them alive just that little bit longer. And looking at the weapon options, the first 2 we have is the Eldar Missile Launcher and the Bright Lance. The Eldar Missile Launcher is a flexible weapon able to deal with both infantry and light vehicles, which gives the Vyper some flexibility. And I think the Eldar Missile Launcher is a decent choice on the Vyper because it has a high range. So if you want to use your Vyper for sitting in the back and just kind of harassing enemy units and stuff like that, then the Eldar Missile Launcher is a good choice for that. However, if you want to punch a bigger hole into tanks and monsters, then the Bright Lance has pretty good anti-large damage that can do decent work against light or medium tanks or monsters. So either way, your anti-tank options are pretty decent here with the Bright Lance and the Eldar Missile Launcher, and they're not too expensive either. The most expensive option being the Bright Lance, only bringing the Vyper up to 55 points, which is still a pretty good deal for the points. Looking at the anti-infantry options of the Vyper, the Scatter Laser is the cheapest option, coming in at 0 points, with basically making the Vyper a 40-point model. And it's really great for taking out chaff units and other lightly armored infantry. So Scatter Laser is a pretty effective weapon in general, and this weapon is not only cheap, which makes the Vyper a more cost-effective option, but it is good at clearing out chaff and things like that. On the other hand, the Shuriken Cannon and the Star Cannon are better suited for engaging heavier infantry models or models with 2 wounds, things without a -1 damage reduction. So in rare cases, the Scatter Laser will be more effective than both of these options for the points against things like Death Guard and any model that has a -1 modifier to its damage. For example, the new Leagues of Votann models, the Hearthguard, have a -1 to damage dealt. So these 2 weapons aren't going to be good against targets like that. And the Scatter Laser is actually, believe it or not, going to be better against those targets. But against most heavy infantry, the Shuriken Cannon and the Star Cannon are going to be your better options going forward. Also, just a quick note on the Star Cannon. The Star Cannon is an interesting option, I think. I think that it does some things well, especially against targets with 2 wounds that are very high value. Things like Custodes or Grey Knights, the Star Cannon is very good because those models do not have invulnerable saves, generally speaking. However, what the Star Cannon does suffer against is models that have, again, -1 damage on their profiles, or models that have a 4+ or better invul save. Because basically, at that point, the Star Cannon isn't going to be doing anything more than the Shuriken Cannon would do. And if you look at the Shuriken Cannon, it does have 1 extra shot over the Star Cannon, even though the Star Cannon has a little bit more range. So that is something else to consider. And a lot of people will also say that, yeah, the Star Cannon does have higher strength, but against a vast majority of targets, the Strength 7 really isn't going to matter. Because the types of opponents that you're going to be shooting at with the Star Cannon are not going to be toughness 7 and over, so it really won't matter too much. Most targets will be either toughness 4 or toughness 5, and the Shuriken Cannon does just as good of a job wounding those targets as the Star Cannon does. So the Star Cannon is a very niche weapon in my opinion, and you can definitely use it if you have a strategy to use it to take out things like jet bikes or more expensive elite units like Grey Knights or Custodes and things like that. The Star Cannon can do very well against those targets, but in general, if you're looking for a more general purpose weapon for heavy infantry, I think the Shuriken Cannon is your better bet. And of course, the Vyper comes with a secondary weapon, the twin Shuriken Catapult, which is good at killing off a model here and there or getting a few wounds on something here and there. And the cool thing about it is it can shoot after advancing, allowing you to get some damage in while trying to get to objectives or score or block enemies off and things like that. So it can also get some shots off when advancing with this thing. As for the special rules, it has 2 special rules of note. It has the explodes ability, but it's only a small mini explosion. It only explodes 3 inches, and those units only suffer 1 mortal wound. And Ride the Wind basically means that you always advance the full 6 inches. This is really good for getting to objectives, really good for body blocking and things like that, and just basically messing with your opponent or getting back to safety. So the question becomes, how do you use Vypers in your games? What are the best ways to do so? So there's 3 basic ways that I think Vypers are best used, and that is 1, as a roadblock, 2, as a secondary objective scorer, and lastly, as a long-range harassment piece. As a roadblock, because of its length and the speed of the model itself, and what I mean by length is the actual size of the model, the Vyper makes a really good roadblock to throw in front of enemy units to slow them down. It can also assault into shooting-oriented units to prevent them from shooting in the next turn, meaning they'll have to fall back or they'll have to stay in combat with the Vyper. And lastly, you can deny enemies the ability to get onto objectives with this model. So in this first example, we see a Vyper blocking 5 models from getting onto the objective, which we currently control. And this unit would normally be able to charge really easily into that unit on the objective, kill that unit, and then take the objective for themselves. But if we have a Vyper in the way, that unit is going to either have to go around and not be able to assault or get on the objective, or it's going to have to charge into the Vyper, and again, might kill the Vyper, but is not going to get to the objective. In the next example, we have a similar situation, except that the unit in question is a shooting unit in the backfield. So very powerful shooting unit in the back. We have a unit on an objective, which the shooting unit would normally have line of sight to be able to kill. And our Vyper is used to charge into that unit to deny it the ability to kill our unit on the objective during their turn. So again, the enemy is not able to use their units effectively to be able to wipe you off of objectives. And lastly, if we have a Vyper and we have nothing on an objective, we can prevent enemies from getting to it anyway by body blocking, putting the Vyper in front of the enemy unit so that it cannot get to the objective effectively. And 1 Vyper is usually enough to do the job here, but if you do have 2 Vypers, you can block a lot more distance because you can actually space out Vypers just enough so that models can't squeeze through them without engaging them, and models are going to have a much harder time going around them as well. So unless they have the fly ability or they have insane movement values, it's really going to be hard for any kind of unit to get around 2 Vypers screening you out off of an objective. The next way that Vypers are good is as secondary objective scorers. So Vypers make great cheap tools for scoring on things like behind enemy lines and scout the enemy. Yes, Vypers can in fact use the scout the enemy action. Now, they're not as good at Rangers as doing it. It doesn't complete at the end of the turn, but usually Vipers are durable enough to survive a few hits, unlike Rangers, and they'll be able to survive and complete the action the next turn. They are also fast enough to get there quickly and reposition if needed. And the cool thing about Vipers as well is they're small enough to hide efficiently. So you can hide a Viper behind pretty much any piece of obscuring terrain. No matter how small it is, a Viper will be able to easily hide within it. So here's an example of a Viper trying to get into the enemy deployment zone. And as you can see, the movement value is enough to be able to get there and be able to harass a backline tank or something like that as well. So not only can you score on things like behind enemy lines, but you can also get some damage in as well. And lastly, Vipers can be used effectively as a long-range harassment piece. They have access to heavy weapons, which makes them a decent damage dealer for their cost. They're not the best damage out there, but for their low point cost, they're pretty decent. And in a pinch, they can also be used to, again, score on secondary objectives or body block if they need to. And they can hide pretty easily to strike and reposition again if enemy units threaten their positions. So, when should I include a Viper or two in my list? If you're asking yourself this question, what you need to consider is if you need units that can contribute to scoring secondaries. So Vipers are really good at scoring secondaries in the early game and getting in your opponent's deployment zone. If that matches with your army's strengths and playstyle, then a Viper is a great addition to your list. Or if you're looking for something cheap to screen and prevent assaults for your more fragile units, let's say that you have a pure shooting army and you don't really have a lot of counterpunch units like Howling Banshees or Wraith Blades or anything like that to assault enemy units and prevent charges, then Vipers are a great way to prevent these assaults. Wave Serpents can do it, but Vipers can do it better and for cheaper. A Viper is actually not quite the same size as a Wave Serpent, obviously, but it's a fraction of the cost and it's a little bit faster. Because again, remember, a Wave Serpent doesn't have the ride to the wind ability, so it has to roll for its advances, and a Viper doesn't. It always gets the full 6. So it's a little bit better at body blocking for your units for its cost than the Wave Serpent is. And lastly, if you're looking for just that little bit of extra anti-infantry, tank, or monster damage that can also stay out of harm's way, then a single Viper can go a long way towards finishing units off that only have one model left and basically just being a nuisance to them. So, for example, if you have a Viper with a scatter laser and the enemy has one model on an objective left, well, guess what? That model, unless you want to waste a whole other unit shooting at it, is probably going to survive. But the Vipers are cheap enough to where you can actually afford to shoot them and not lose much in the process. Alrighty, so next I'm going to show you guys 2 effective Viper builds that complement their role very well. The first build is called Sacrifice to Cain. I wonder why it's called that. We'll see. And then the next one is the Wasp, which is actually a build that I showed you guys before in one of my heavy weapon videos that I made a while back. It's, in my opinion, still one of the better ways to run Vipers. So let's get right into it and look at the builds. So the first one here is Sacrifice to Cain. Basically, this has 1 or 2 Vipers equipped with scatter lasers. It'll cost you anywhere from 40 to 80 points. And this build is cheap and fast. It's able to score on secondaries quickly, and also, if need be, sacrifice themselves to screen or tie up enemy units. So this is a very effective build. It's not very expensive, can score on secondaries for you fairly easily, and is able to provide some nice light infantry supporting fire as well. The other build is called the Wasp, and the Wasp is basically just 1 Viper equipped with a Bright Lance for 55 points. It's great at staying out of harm's way while engaging enemy armor for consistent ping damage, and it can also contribute to scoring on secondaries and screening in a pinch. So it is a little more expensive. You don't always want to take it just for the reason to screen and to score on secondaries, but if you need to, it can be an excellent piece for it. And I would not recommend, my quick recommendation, I would not recommend taking this build in units larger than 1. The reason why is because it is a little more costly, And if you take them in units larger than 1, they become kind of a prime target for your opponent to kill, and it makes them harder to hide behind small pieces of obscuring terrain. So do be aware of that if you take 2 of these, it could be easier to hide and get the most damage out of them. So in conclusion, I think Vypers are a great include if you are looking for a cheap unit that can score on objectives and hamper your opponent throughout the game. They can also act as a decent harassment unit, and they can ping down tanks with the Bright Lancer missile launcher, or finish off the last model in an infantry unit if you are taking the scatter laser, shuriken cannon, or star cannon. And I don't think you should take these in very large numbers. I don't think they warrant that. I don't really think they do enough damage to warrant that, but they are a good utility piece for taking out little things here and there, helping the rest of your army by supporting on secondary objectives and things like that for a relatively cheap cost. I mean, if you think about it, a squad of 1 of these, I should say, is only 40 points at its minimum. And for that cost, you could be doing the same thing as a unit of Rangers in the enemy deployment zone and possibly be much safer because, again, Vypers are easier to keep alive than Rangers are in most situations. So something to definitely think about when you guys are building your lists. If you need a little bit of extra secondary punch, then one Vyper, I should say, can help fill that gap. And on a personal level, even though I don't really care much for Vypers, I have been having fun with them over the last couple games, and they are very helpful at what they do. They are very good at what they do for their points. So if you are thinking about needing something for a little bit of extra secondary objective power or some screening, maybe consider throwing a 40-point Vyper into your list to see how it does. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I will see you guys next time. As always, leave a comment in the comment section if you have some experience with Vypers or you want something to share or have something to share about them. I'd be more than happy to take your guys' advice and take a look. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.